100 years from now, if somebody should bring up my name, if it would still be around, it would be nice if people say, geez, I thought he was a good writer. His stories gave me a lot of pleasure. That's what people tell me now, and it's the best thing any writer can ever hear.
Hey guys, this video is different from my normal videos. Most of you guys requested me to do a Draw My Life on Stan Lee, but that's not the reason why I'm making this video. I want you guys to know that I grew up reading all type of comics. Those comics were a big part of my childhood, and even now, all the Marvel movies are a big part of my life. I love superhero stuff, the movies, the games, and all the other things. I know most of you guys do too. I'm a big fan of Stan. That man literally created a universe that millions of people love and admire. Without him, all the comics and Marvel movies that we love wouldn't be there. We don't realize, but entertainment's a big part of our lives. It's a getaway from our day-to-day problems and stress. And I'm really grateful to Stan that he created all these. I know people are sad with Stan Lee's death, but death was inevitable. We'll all die one day, but I'm so happy that Stan lived to an amazing life of 95 years. That man died doing what he loves to do, regardless of age, regardless of money. Stan Lee lived an amazing life, and he has one hell of an amazing story. That's the reason I'm making this video. I spent 4 days creating this video, making sure that I cover everything, because that man's a legend, and I want to tell you guys everything about it.
I'm Stan Lee. I've been writing stories for the young generation for the past 30 years.
I'm doing what I enjoy doing. To me, it is such fun creating characters, writing stories, and when you do something that you know the fans seem to enjoy, that gives you such satisfaction you don't want to stop.
So, Stan Lee's real name is Stan Martin Leiber. He was born on December 28, 1922, in a small apartment in Manhattan, New York City. His parents, Jack Leiber and Celia, were of Roman origin. They were part of the Jewish immigrants who flew to America during the early 1900s. His dad was a trained dress cutter and mom stayed at home. From the early 1930s, the Great Depression hit America, which affected Stan's family too. The only income from tailoring works done by his dad also got reduced. In 1931, Stan's brother was born, Lawrence Leiber, also known as Larry Leiber. With less or no income, Stan's family was barely surviving. They moved from one place to another in the city to accommodate their livelihood. As a child, Stan Lee was highly influenced by books and movies. He used to read classic novels all the time. He was specifically fond of Sherlock Holmes novels.
There were the Hardy Boys, Don Sturdy, and Tom Swift. One was an adventurer, one was an inventor. I loved Emile Zola. I loved Charles Dickens. Whenever I got an extra 50 cents, I'd buy one of those books.
During his school days, Stan used to do part-time jobs to help his family. He had a job to advertise the hospital, National Tuberculosis Center, through press releases. He's also worked as an office boy in textile stores, sold subscriptions to the New York Herald newspaper.
Then I got a job writing publicity for a hospital. I gave that job up. Actually, I had started as an actor. I thought I wanted to be an actor. And in those days, there was just no money.
In school, Stan had to skip grades as the family couldn't afford much for his education. He attended the DeWitt Clinton High School in Bronx, Manhattan. He studied with elder students and finished his schooling early at the age of 16 in 1939. Once he was graduated from school, Stan was searching for full-time jobs. He started working with the WPA Federal Theater Project. He was working as an actor, and as Stan remembers that, there was no money in acting those days. During this time, he got a job opportunity through his cousin Jean Davis. She offered him a general office assistant job at her husband's publishing company. Stan was more than happy to take up such a job. The company was called Timely Publications, which later turned into Marvel Comics. The publisher, Martin Goodman, allowed his wife's cousin to join his publications to cover all sorts of office boy work. Stan joined there immediately in 1939. Little did he know that he was stepping into the future Marvel Comics, and he was making the biggest move of his life.
No, actually, when I started, I applied for a job in this publishing company. I saw an ad. I didn't know they published comics. I thought it was a real publishing company. When I saw they wanted me to work in the comic book department, I figured, hey, why not? I'll get some experience for a while, and then I'll get into the real world.
Now, let's go back and check the history of American comics a little bit. The comics publications in America was prominently dominated by only one publication during that time. It was DC Comics. DC Comics was founded in 1934. Superman was already introduced in 1938, and Flash, Batman in 1939. All of them were huge successes, and their readers were children. Of course, there were other small publication characters like Captain Marvel, which also became a big sensation. To say the least, the late 1930s to 1950s is called the Golden Age of comic books. Martin Goodman quickly understood that trend and started a publications company with an aim to jump into the bandwagon of comics. They introduced the Human Torch, Detective the Angel, Captain America, and all those became big hits. They sold like 80,000 copies of their first edition of their comic book strip. Predicting a fortune, Goodman assembled an in-house staff, mainly the writer-artist Joe Simon as editor and drawing artist Jack Kirby. Stan was there in that office desk as part of his new-formed comics team, but sadly, he was just an office boy back then. Talking about his initial days in Timely Publications, Stan is told that his duties were so mundane at first. He had to make sure that the inkwells of pen were filled properly, as the writers used to write by dipping their pen in ink. He got them lunch, he did proofreading, he erased the pencils from the finished pages for them, he got them coffee and would sweep out the place.
They hired me to write some copy, do some proofreading, a little bit of editing, and also get coffee for the large staff, which consisted of 2 people, and sweep up the place and so forth.
After a couple years in 1941, Stan got the responsibility to write text fillers for the then created superhero Captain America. Writing text fillers for a comic series was kind of embarrassing for Stan. He kept a pseudonym for this by dividing his name as Stan Lee, so that in future his real name would not be associated with comics.
So I figured I'm not going to use my real name, which I'm saving for posterity, for these silly comic books. So I cut my first name into 2, called myself Stan Lee.
Stan said that working for comics felt so silly that he was waiting to get into the real world once he could gain some writing experience there. In late 1941, the creators Joe Simon and Jack Kirby left Timely Publications due to disagreements with Martin Goodman. As a temporary solution, Martin asked then 19-year-old Stan if he could manage the editor post until Martin finds a new person. Now, that was something Stan Lee could not deny. He started to handle the whole editing, writing part of Timely Publications. Stan Lee's told that Martin never found a new person.
The publisher said, hey, do you think you could hold down the job as editor until I get an adult, normal human being? Well, when you're 17, what do you know? I said, sure, I could do it. And stayed there ever since. I guess he never found a normal human being.
In early 1942, as part of the war, Stan Lee had to go on service. And guess what? He was writing comics even there.
And they would ship me around the country wherever a post needed somebody to write training films or instructional books. And that was pretty much what I did during the war. And I did posters also.
He helped in the war zone for creating awareness posters and cartoons. Stan returned by 1945 when the war ended. He joined back in his company as editor, art director, and head writer. It was around this time Stan Lee met his wife. During that time, as a young man ready for dating, Stan was supposed to meet a girl. As he reached the place and knocked on the door, a young lady opened the door for him. He knew that this was not the girl he was about to meet, but at that moment, he knew that he's going to marry the lady in front of him. Stan Lee remembers that his wife, Joan, looked exactly like the dream woman he used to draw from his young age. It was unbelievable, but very real. He married Joan Clayton Bucock on December 5th, 1947, at the age of 27. The couple shared a great bonding through their married life. Joan had been the greatest support for Stan until she died in the summer of 2017. They had a daughter in 1950. By 1950, Timely Publications became Atlas Comics. Post-war, the comics industry was going through a real downtime. Nothing was working out. Throughout that decade, Stan Lee was working with Atlas Comics, writing anything and everything. By 1960, he found himself doing nothing exciting and nowhere near his dream. Stan was not allowed to infuse any creative extras in whatever was going on there. He got frustrated and decided to quit his job for good. As he discussed this decision with his wife, she told Stan to take a last chance. She asked Stan to write something the way he wanted and try to publish it with Atlas. Anyway, Stan was leaving, so why not take a risk and get fired? Stan Lee is later told that his wife's words actually changed everything for him in his life. Interestingly enough, the next day Martin Goodman had a talk with Stan. This was the time when DC Comics came up with Justice League. So Martin asked Stan to create something like a superhero, as it might work. This was perfect. Stan wrote the Fantastic Four as a last project to Atlas. He wasn't sure about the outcome and he wasn't worried. He wrote it with all the creative freedom and put his heart into it.
My publisher, Martin Goodman, said, "Give me a new superhero," and I came up with the Fantastic Four. It sold very well. We had never gotten fan mail before, but we started getting fan mail.
Jack Kirby was back in the company by then, and he made the drawings for Stan. In 1961, the first edition of Fantastic Four was released. In Fantastic Four, Stan created a new superhero version, giving them flawed humanity. The heroes argued on petty matters, worried about money, and behaved more like everyday people.
I tried to write a well-rounded character with every character I did, rather than just somebody who is extra strong and can beat up the bad guys.
The series became the first major success for the company. Actually, they published these under a new name, Marvel Comics. The new approach in comics changed the industry. It won't be an exaggeration if we say this revolutionized the whole comics arena. Till then, superheroes were like gods, the perfect creatures that normal people looked up to. Now we had superheroes who were relatable. As Fantastic Four went on becoming popular, Marvel Comics came into competition with DC Comics. This was a start, just the beginning of Marvel Comics. Stan and Jack co-created a series of new characters in the coming years, which all went on to become hits. In 1962, the Hulk was created. In the same year, Thor was created. Marvel Comics became a talk, and the Stan-Jack pair was working day in and day out. At this point, Marvel Comics became a popular name in the comics industry. This was also the time when Stan saw a spider and got the craziest idea ever. Ironically, it became the million-dollar idea and changed the destiny of Marvel Comics and Stan in the coming years.
I was sitting and I saw a fly crawling on the wall, and I said, wow, suppose a person had the power to stick to a wall like an insect. And I got to Spider-Man. It sounded mysterious and dramatic, and lo, a legend was born.
Stan's told that he was so excited about the idea of a man having the ability to crawl in walls and being able to spread out nets like a spider. But when he talked this with his publisher, he was like, that's the most horrible idea we've ever heard.
I'll tell you something funny about that. Nobody wanted me to do it. My publisher, when I suggested the idea, he said, that's the worst thing I ever heard of.
Why?
People hate spiders. You can't call a hero Spider-Man.
However, Stan was determined to go ahead with this, and he talked to Steve Ditko to draw his new character, Spider-Man. The name Spider-Man was decided after trying many other names like Insect Man, Fly Man, Mosquito Man. Stan had told that Spider-Man was special for so many reasons. This was the first superhero who was a teenager. Like any other teenager who reads stories, Spider-Man was shy. He wasn't successful. He wasn't good with girls. He had family problems, school problems, and yet he was a superhero saving and helping people. It was totally relatable. Stan also said that teenagers were always sidekicks in most of the comics. He wanted to take the teenager from being a sidekick to main hero status. August 1962, Spider-Man's released, and it went on to become the most successful character of Marvel Comics. Steve did a great job in giving Spider-Man the face and life, and continued to draw Spider-Man for years. Years later, in 1970, Stan Lee became the publisher of Marvel Comics and had no time to write stories. So another person took over the writing. Roy Thomas. Later, so many writers have written Spider-Man, the legendary character. In the early 1970s, the Spider-Man story depicted friend Harry as a drug addict. This was against the comics code and wasn't allowed to publish. However, Stan Lee ignored the censor and published them, as the story had a clear anti-drug message. The issue sold very well, and subsequently the comics code was later revised. After Spider-Man, in 1962, Ant-Man was introduced. 1963, X-Men and Iron Man came along. In the same year, the next million-dollar idea came out. Yes, the Avengers. The collaboration of the characters and the creation of the Marvel Universe was so exciting for the readers. Stan Lee was always on the go to create new characters, excite his readers, and do anything required for these. However, in this hustle, he kind of ignored his deserved benefits out of these. He was giving so much and was getting paid for his work as an employee. At the same time, his characters were earning millions for others. Being an employee and a co-creator of Marvel, Stan was not entitled for any profit percentages. By 1998, Stan and Marvel signed a contract which entitled Stan to get 10% of all profits earned by his characters in movies and TV shows. In 2002, Stan sued Marvel, stating he was not given his proper share and demanded a compensation of $1 billion. In 2005, Stan and Marvel finally settled the case for an undisclosed seven-figure amount. In 2016, Stan said in an interview that he was stupid in a business way and also said he should have been greedier. Stan Lee was a gentleman and a visionary. Till his last year in life, Stan was working. He never retired and never wanted to because he loved his work. At 95, he was as energetic and excited as he was in his 20s. Stan Lee's made a mark in the comics industry that's irreplaceable. Stan Lee was a person of virtues, and he wanted his superheroes to be role models for the young generation. He imagined the perfect world for them. He revolutionized the industry and gave a new face to the comics world. He made the creators of cartoon the friends of readers. He made an alternate universe for the readers and unleashed the imagination to the sky's limit. The comics industry, which was highly focused on child readers, has evolved to a different level altogether. And the role Stan played in this is unforgettable. Stan's witty and cool nature had earned him a lot of young fans, even at his age of 95. As he always said, he wanted respect for the art he and his artists were doing. And if we really see, that's what he gained and gave to the comic industry through his work over the years. He earned the respect that this art form deserved. In 2017, Stan Lee's longtime companion, his wife Joan, died. This affected Stan a lot. Like his famous signing off with his trademark motto, Excelsior, he signed off graciously on November 12, 2018.
I don't think about that much. You know, when I'm gone, I really don't care. It doesn't do you any good when you're gone.